Welcome to this fifth video, which is the last video, I'm sure you'll be pleased to know, when we're looking at international trade. Really important to actually make sure you've watched all the videos through and that you do understand the topic, so that when we talk about it in seminars you've got a massive head start. This last video we're going to be looking at exchange rates, and this really actually builds on from the previous video when we were thinking about single markets. So if we think about exchange rates is quite simply just the rate at which one currency can be exchanged with another. It's the expression of relationship between two currencies. So £1 might be worth €1.20 or $1.40. So for businesses involved in international trade, the exchange rate is a real crucial component of the costs. And you may find that you're buying components from Japan, which means converting your pounds to yen. And making purchases can actually go the other way. So from the US, they'd actually be looking at changing the pounds to the US dollar. If we think about the exchange rates in a free market, so a UK business purchasing from a US business, it supplies in pounds, but it demands in dollars in order to actually make the payment. So a higher exchange rate can mean there's more dollars to pounds. And the implication, therefore, is that investment purchase is cheaper and demand is therefore higher. So for a UK business or consumer, if there's a US higher exchange rate, it means there's more dollars to the pound. So it's relatively cheaper for us to make purchases. So $10 may fall from, say, £8 to £7. However, the reverse is true. So a falling exchange rate means fewer dollars to the pound. So the relative cost to us for the good or service goes up. So it's really important for businesses to actually understand what the exchange rate is likely to be. So if we were to consider the managing of exchange rate, so too much movement in the exchange rate causes uncertainty, which can prevent investment. So if we know what's likely to happen, we can actually make decisions on what we believe the exchange rates are likely to be. If we're uncertain, the chances are actually we'll put off investments or bring forward or stop in tracks and not actually make investments. So uncertainty is never good for the economy. We need businesses to be buying, to be selling, and to be really involved in economic activity. So it's really important we're able to predict, to try and control, and to actually know what this decisions is going to be, so we can be kept in control as much as possible. So the role of government through the central bank is therefore to act to manage to stabilise the exchange rates, and it could be perhaps by selling gold or foreign currency reserves to buy pounds. It could be borrowing in order to purchase pounds, and raising the interest rates to encourage UK savers to keep their money in this country. And all of this makes it harder for other countries to buy the pounds and to try and affect our exchange rate. Now, one of the ways round this is by setting up a single currency, in this case the euro, so a zone where all countries trade in one currency, and effectively eliminates all the problems of different currencies and the conversion rates. So the euro was preceded by the exchange rate mechanism, the ERM, which limited exchange rate fluctuations between currencies to actually set boundaries. So we're part of this, but we came out in the 90s. The government was committed to keeping in small boundaries, but they had to make decisions which they may not have actually wanted to do so, and it could possibly have implications on the growth of our domestic economy. So this is the reason why the EU came out, as at the time it was in recession and it wanted to reduce interest rates, but it wouldn't have been able to do so and keep in the limits if it was part of this currency. 1992, the Maastricht Treaty set out 5 conditions for joining the single currency, the euro. So these are the rules you have to stick to if you want to be a member of the euro. So inflation no more than 1.5% more than the average of the lowest three countries. The interest rate is no more than 2% above the average of the lowest three countries. The budget deficit would never be more than 3% of GDP. The general government debt no more than 60% of GDP. And the exchange rates within the RM bands kept for within 2 years. You look at these and you can look at what we were thinking about last week about the amount of borrowing that's actually going on, which is perhaps way in excess of 60%. And then you think about countries like Greece and Spain and Portugal. But once you're in this euro, these are the rules you have to keep. If we think about creating this single currency, it meant you actually had to set up a single central bank, the ECB, the European Central Bank. So for example, the Bank of France, the Bank of Germany, the Bank of Spain, they all had to be replaced with this central bank. So there are no exchange rates between member states, and there's a shared monetary policy, including a common base interest rates for all member states. So the states aren't in control of their monetary policy. So they've effectively handed it over centrally. And you think of in the UK, the central bank is the Bank of England, which indirectly the government controls. But if you lived, for example, in Germany or in France, you would have no government central bank. But individual governments, of course, still do control fiscal policy, government spending, and government tax. If we look at this map of the EU, and you can see that the dark blue members use euros, the light blue ones are pegged to euro within the fixed areas, the green are members of the EU but don't use a single currency, but they're all subject to trade and countries, and anyone joining the EU now does actually have to look at this euro. There's advantages and disadvantages. If we think first of all about the advantages, it actually eliminates these exchange costs. I think we all know what it's like when you go on holiday. You have this cost to exchange currency, you pay commission. No longer is there a cost here, so you don't have to worry about your French francs or your German marks, because everyone actually uses the same currency. And if we think about there's now a price transparency, it creates more competition. We're all competing on the same terms. So this increased competition, the efficiency, it's so much easier now to compare the cost between countries as they're marked up in the same currency. So you can rely on this difference and it won't change on a daily or an hourly basis. It's much easier for businesses. The elimination of exchange rate uncertainty, you don't worry about this now, it's a huge benefit to business because you're buying in the same currency your raw materials. There's increased inward investment, there's more confidence in the performance of the economy, and you can access trade areas, a totally new area to trade from. And there's lower inflation and interest rates. The suggestion is it does actually reduce the interest rates, but there's less certainty about this now. But the idea is it will actually lower the prices. If we think about the disadvantages of a single currency, so there's very much this one size all fits economic policies. So it's a requirement on this policy that EU is a central bank and it controls monetary policy, regardless of whether it suits your particular country's economic climate or problems at that time. So raising the interest can actually have a different effect in different country. So a differing policy does have this different effect. There's the impact of economic shocks. So political shocks in one country can actually therefore be felt right the way across the Eurozone. So for example, if there's uncertainty of a loan being paid back from Greece and when it will pay it back and if they'll honour the agreement, This shocks will be felt by all. So businesses in Belgium will be affected just as much as this as the one in the UK, which isn't actually part of the currency. The transition costs tended to actually be a rounding up of prices, causing inflation. Perhaps the 1p's and the 2p's became 5's or the 10's. And there's huge costs in actually coming up with new money. And when this change has been taking place in different countries, retailers have taken advantage and actually putting additional handling costs on money. It also requires political integration. So the creation of the European Central Bank, you then have to rely on them to run the monetary policy, and more political integration. And for UK and a number of other countries, the idea of giving up your monetary policy and maybe some of the other powers to someone else is their reason against joining this single currency. So we're more concerned over perhaps the interest rates and the notion of the home businesses, the nation having this profound effect in the UK. So more concerned about keeping actually more control in your particular country.